This is a community event organized by both groups, and we have lots of opportunities for new speakers that are basically finding their ways into the industry, and they want to have hints, and they want to basically present their talks into a safer environment, maybe get the contacts for one day, like speak on this major interesting public conference that they love, right? And I really, really would like you all to welcome to our communities. If you're not a member yet, I'll ping you the link, right? And the speakers clinic is something that we're bringing back. It used to be part of our activities during the early days of the communities. Then we kind of stopped doing them for a while. The idea is exactly to address your questions. And even with time, we'll bring up like excerpts of your own presentations, and we can help you in any way that you see fit. Right. So I don't know, Barry, if you have anything else that you want to add here. Otherwise, it's Carly, you are the person.
No, I mean we set up this group because we've seen so many speakers um, get started and then go on to international stardom, start businesses, become subject matter experts, and we've seen their careers just completely transform because they started speaking. And so we set up early on. Obviously, as Anthony was one of the initial people that started the group as well. And that's really what we were trying to do. Like it's one of those things that not everyone does. If you do, you elevate yourself above so many of your peers. Whether you're in a big company, it can help you get promoted. If you're not, then it can help you get headhunted, and it's just incredible. And so highly recommend everyone starts it. It's ridiculously addictive, as I'm sure Carly will say once you do start. And yeah, that adrenaline rush, Carly, that comes with it. But no, anyone that wants to get started, we can help in a variety of ways. So yeah,
Yep.
I'll hand over to you guys.
Oh, yes. So the aim was that this could be an open forum that you can ask any questions at all. It's kind of the idea of it being a clinic. So it can be questions, it can be you're looking for particular conferences, you've got a topic in mind and you think, oh, no one's going to listen to this, and you want some reassurance. It can be questions on slides, it can be on all sorts of things, anything at all to do with speaking. And it's a comfortable, safe space where you can ask any question at all. And we'll do our best to answer. Based on the experience of being in this group, which obviously myself, Anthony, and Barry have all been involved in, but also myself having gone through the speaking journey as well over the past few years as well. So been there, done that, had every worry under the sun about it, and happy to talk about that further or try and reassure you in any way. So, did anyone have any particular questions they want to start us off with?
So I think I'll ask one just to break the ice, right? And then so everyone else can follow up. So Carly, I think one of the things that I see you doing a lot, and I get very anxious myself, is I see you giving talks on front end, and then you do give talks on back end and language, like large language models. I know that in a way, Elastic has its own things that you have to promote it, right? But how do how do you fight the feeling that, okay, I'm not the technical expert, I'm not the best person to do it, and actually put one together a talk without like being the person that is the subject matter
Um,
expert for something?
oh, that's a fab question. So I'm sure others can chime in with their own experience, but actually to start off with, I was not comfortable doing what I'd consider talks around code or tech at all. So when I started speaking, I came back from maternity leave. I had been doing like more of an engineering manager and lead role. And at that point, I hadn't done any code for 2 years. And I thought, oh, I don't think I can do this speaking thing because I'm not technical enough. But what I did to start with was I aligned my talks with topics that I was comfortable speaking about. because that's how you're going to build confidence, because then you're less worried about, you know, the kind of imposter, the confidence chasm that you don't know enough, because it's something that you are comfortable with. So my first talk was on learning through parental leave. I then started doing talks on things I was doing as a Scrum Master around Sprint Zero and obstacle boards. And because those were things that a lot of people didn't know too much about, actually that gave me conference accepts to go and speak about it. It also led to me writing a couple of articles, and I managed to cement myself as an expert. But as I kind of grew in confidence, and as my role in that time was also changing, I was diving into other different areas. I was going back into being an engineer again and writing about front end stuff that I was doing in my role. I moved into a role also where I had to build an entire app from scratch, including the Java backend services. So that made me comfortable that I didn't know everything, because it's impossible to know everything. And from there, that basically it became more about kind of being comfortable not knowing everything, and also being comfortable saying I don't know, which I know for a lot of people is really, really hard to admit. And then from there, because I ended up moving into being DevRel, it's my job to keep up to date. It wasn't something that I had to try and fit in my evenings and my weekends like I did as an engineer, because I had deliverables to worry about. And when I moved on to that, I found, kind of same again, I was happy showing like little pet projects and little things I'd done that, while they weren't perfect, they were still cool to show off. And that, through my role, was how I've ended up doing stuff to do with large language models, how I've done vector search stuff, how I've done any of the stuff I do with Elasticsearch. It's just basically when I learn something, I then think about how I can turn it into a talk, how I can turn it into a blog, or some other kind of content, and just share with people. And that's become kind of a natural thing for me to do, partially because it's my job, but partially because it's what I like to do. Guess that answers the question, Anthony.
Does anyone have a question that they would like to ask Carly?
I'll ask one as well, just building on that as well, because I'm in this stage. So I've obviously done a fair amount of event hosting and speaking, that kind of thing, and done some talks at the young conferences and that kind of thing. But I'm far from a kind of really experienced speaker. And I'm considering doing some talks around recruitment, mainly for client generation and that kind of thing. And again, that imposter syndrome that I've told so many people how to deal with, and is like biting away at me. Like I'm not a massively experienced recruiter. I run a recruitment company, but I'm not an experienced recruiter. And so if I'm out there with this, you know, eyes on me, thinking this guy's should know everything. Like I know you've kind of just addressed this, but how do you get past that, right? Like, how do I start presenting and making sure, like, I'm like, what if I'm speaking and you know, there's all these other people that are like, I know how to do this much better than you do, and that kind of thing. How do you get past that kind of that voice in your head that I know shouldn't be talking to me, but I can't seem to stop him talking?
There's a couple of things I've had with talks where I've had that situation where I feel like I don't know enough to talk about it. The first one is I've actually asked people for like feedback as to whether they would attend the talk or not, or whether they'd find it interesting. So a good example is I used to do a talk for a few years all about Sprint Zero, which got accepted to a couple of places. And originally I thought about doing that talk, but I thought it was such a super niche thing that I didn't think people would actually be interested. And then I thought I also knew it was slightly a contentious topic, because people are like, well, you don't need to do Sprint Zero if you're doing Scrum properly. The thing that helped me was, one, I actually asked colleagues that were familiar with the area, would you actually attend this? Would you find this interesting? And also, do you think I'm the right person to speak about it? And more often than not, the answer that's going to come back is yes, because I think we're way too good at putting our own selves down, particularly like the Brits' self-deprecating humor, I think feeds into this a bit as well. So if you have people kind of giving you that push or that nudge to say, yes, you have knowledge, this is something that people would be interested in, go off and do that, I think that gives you an initial big up, because you're effectively validated by your peers. The other thing is, if you maybe feel a bit more removed, One of the things that helped me get back into being technical again, I guess this applies as well, is actually I started asking more questions of people that were on the ground actually doing stuff. And I would incorporate the things that they were doing into my talks as well. So clearly, Barry, in your situation, you'll have recruiters that are talking to people day in, day out. Maybe they're seeing the common pitfalls with CVs or the mistakes that people are doing. And you'll be able to take that and incorporate it in through crowdsourcing those ideas. Because it doesn't all have to be knowledge in your head. It's certainly something that you can learn from other people. So that would be another way that I'd maybe try and tackle it too. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, okay. I don't want to hog the mic, so I'll open up to other people.
The last thing I'll say though is I've been chatting with someone that runs a community in London. It's Pie Ladies, and they've actually been asking us for things like CV tips and tricks and recruitment procedure overviews and stuff like that. So that kind of stuff's actually very in demand, particularly for marginalized groups. So I think you'll find people that will be happy to come and hear you speak about it.
Nice one. Perfect. Thanks, Colin.
So, hey, Rachel, yeah, go for a question.
Thanks. Yeah, I guess I kind of have a follow-up, yeah, similar thread question about that confidence, or even just about knowing what to talk about, right? And I'm sure, Carly, you and I have talked about this before, but it's something I still feel super stuck on. So, like, at work, I've been learning a new language, and I was thinking of putting forward a talk for a conference, but I just felt like, oh, I'm so at the beginning of learning this that I don't know if it would be appropriate to go and speak about how I've been learning. I was like, if someone else is out there learning, they're probably just going to do the same things that I do, go and look at the doc and build some beginner apps. What value is there going to be in me speaking about this? So I didn't end up submitting a talk for it. But that's been like sticking in my mind, and I've been like, ah. And I think the question comes down to me is what is too basic to consider like giving a talk on? What's the kind of, I don't know, like the goalposts that you need to get past before even considering talking about something that you're just learning?
Mhm. I think it depends on the conference partially. So I've got a great example. So this week is Code Bar Festival. So Code Bar is a charity, and they basically help marginalized groups such as women, refugees, etc., getting into code. So they run workshops and they run their annual festival every year. And see the really beginner stuff that you think is so obvious, perfect candidate for conferences like that, because it's not obvious if you're doing things like a career change. It's not obvious if perhaps English is your second language, things like that. So things that you would consider to be like how to learn, there is certainly markets for it in some other conferences that might commonly have things like people and culture tracks, which DevOps UK have. But because quite a lot of them have people that are more kind of mid-level engineers and up, you might find sometimes, unless you've got something very novel, those might not make it through because it is assumed knowledge at that level. But for beginner level, things like Code Bar, speaking at colleges, universities, that's not knowledge you can assume they have. And I would take talks like that. If you're not sure that it's too beginner, I would target those ones. The other thing that I'd think about as well is, think about this. Sorry, I've gone blank a moment. The other thing that I'd potentially think about as well on that one is if it's a new technology that not a lot of people know about, they need to know about the beginner stuff. And I've actually found that I've assumed stuff is beginner that's not actually beginner. So a good example for me is the vector search stuff has been around for a year. There's all sorts of different vendors doing stuff with it. There's talks at every conference. It's everywhere. Oh, no worries, I'm joining late. And And actually, I thought I didn't submit to a bunch of conferences because I thought, oh, people already know this. And then the beginner topics ended up getting presented by somebody else. So if it's really new things, like particular frameworks, like it's a new framework or it's a new kind of paradigm or it's sitting along a kind of edgy theme, submit those anyway because people don't know how to use that stuff yet and your beginner knowledge is going to be useful. Does that answer your question, Rachel?
Yeah, that's really helpful. I think I've been thinking about it from kind of the wrong angle. I've been thinking about it more from the inside out rather than, oh yeah, just find a different forum to present it at. That's yeah, really great tips. Thanks, Carly.
No worries. And if you want to run the idea by me, you can ping me afterwards if you want.
Thank you.
Cool. Oh, I've got someone that's put a question in the chat, so we can go with that one next. Oh, an upcoming cyber event that you're speaking at next month. So, Yemirai, do you want to give a bit more detail about what you're doing? And is there anything in particular you're worried about with your event?
Yeah, hello, sorry, I'm at work at the minute, so I'm trying to balance listening in while doing work. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, no worries.
Okay, great, yeah, so my name's Yamai. I'm trying to do a lot more speaking engagements. I was a bit scared at first because I thought, oh, like, I'm not technical enough or I don't have the most knowledge in the room and like, you know, everyone here is like super smart. But next month I'm going to be like embark on my journey and facing the fear essentially and just talking about my squiggly career into cybersecurity because I come from a chemistry background and I want to do more of those things. So I'm really just joining these conversations to get more inspiration and more confidence and motivation to, you know, feel the fear and do it anyway. I would like to do more like technical talks like the cyber threat landscape, but I'm a bit cautious that because everybody talks about it, am I just going to be another person talking about the same thing as well? So yeah, it's just I'm here just to listen in and, you know, find out more about the public speaking space with regards to technology.
Yeah, cool. That's amazing. Congrats on the speaking engagement, by the way. That's fantastic. So I guess you talked about like the security landscape and things like that. I guess targeting the right security at developer conferences is interesting because, I mean, my experience is I'm not the best when it comes to security as a developer. I think there's definitely all we can learn. So if you wanted to do more of the developer education side of security, I think there's definitely some interest there, which might, you know, is more kind of maybe beginner level content that can help you build up your confidence a bit. So you could give that a go. But there's also really cool community conferences for security. So there's things like SteelCon up north. There's all the B-sides, if you're aware of those. And whenever I get to go to those, like everyone I meet is super lovely and the organizers are fab. So I'm sure they'd be happy to, even if you didn't get accepted first time round, to give you feedback on your submissions to improve, because they're a really cool bunch. And then the only thing I'd say for your session coming up is, you know, practice, do what you feel to get prepared. If that's run throughs, because I to prepare for a talk, like I'm doing a talk on Friday, I do trial runs where I talk to myself in my office, and my neighbors probably think I look really strange. So doing things like maybe planning out roughly what you're going to say, but not like a script. I find scripts kind of make me more nervous, but everybody's different. You could try that and kind of making sure you're feeling comfortable and prepared and happy. I think that's the only tips I give, but you're going to smash it. You'll be great.
Thank you.
So Rob, you have a question there.
Yes, hi Carly. Thanks for giving up your time. My question, and pardon the puppy barking in the background, is how do you go about preparing for a talk? I think it's like, how do you research? How do you decide what angle you're going to take, what pitch you're going to make? What are the key things you really think about when you're actually prepping for it?
That is a question. So I tend to get talk ideas randomly from all the things I do in my work. So I have this really bad problem of inspiration strikes at really awkward times. So for example, the times when I don't have my phone on me and I need to note things down, seems to be the point when I think, oh, so I tend to try and have like a keep note on my phone and note down all my random talk ideas. I also use a board at work as well to dump talk ideas in, and then when I'm kind of looking for ideas of what talk to build, I tend to kind of try and leverage those. I mean, part of my job means I have to talk about things that are Elastic related, so sometimes there's themes for the year, but I'd still have an element of freedom on what I can talk about as well. So I tend to use that kind of forum. The next thing is I'll write the abstract. So when you're submitting to conferences, they use most of the time use a format called CFP, which is call for papers or call for proposals. And I'll write an abstract for that. In fact, I can show you an example of what an abstract for me tends to look like, because I have a very particular format to make sure that I actually write stuff that I write an abstract that's probably detailed enough to help me form the plan, because it's really easy to just write 2 paragraphs for a talk and that's it. So let me just pull up one of my abstracts and I can share. Where's the cake one? I think the cake one's a good example. Cool. Okay. So let me share my screen and I'll show. Oh, Barry, can you enable screen sharing on this for me? Oh, still not working.
There you go, Carly. You should be the host now.
Perfect. Thank you. So, oh, no, that's not what I wanted to share. Gotta share the right screen. Desktop 1. There we go. Right. So this is an example of an abstract that I got recently accepted for DevOps UK. So this is the actual abstract, but I write additional things on top to help me plan it out before I even go to code and slides. So I'll write a really brief kind of outline, which is basically the high level, what's the tagline of the talk, like what's actually important, what's going to draw people in. And I try to put it as a problem. And then I normally throw in notes, but the main thing of my notes is I always have a background as to why I'm giving the talk. And then I always try and do an outline of the takeaways for people, because that means it will keep me right when I go to plan and do my actual deck later. I always figure out the target audience. Even if this isn't something that's on the CFP form, it's useful because it means that you can try and use it to target conferences where you think this is useful and that people will actually, you know, are going to be at that conference potentially. So for example, if I was doing like my Sprint Zero talk, it might go down well at some developer conferences, but probably won't go down well at a data science conference because they don't use those constructs. So I wouldn't submit it there because the target audience doesn't fit. And then if I have any other kind of notes, so for example, if I'm building an app that I'm going to be showcasing the inner workings and details of, I need to have a rough architecture in my head. So I'll note those things down. And that's basically how I write the outline to submit. Then once I'm accepted, I'll build out the code first. And then once I've built the code out, I'll then do the slides after that. And I'll probably start running practices every day for like at least 2 weeks for a big conference, and for a small conference, probably every day for a week, just to run through talking to myself to make sure I'm comfortable with what I'm going to be presenting.
Awesome, Carly. Thank you. That was more information than I expected and super helpful. Really appreciate that.
You're welcome. Cool. Greg, have you got a question?
Yeah. So the question is actually, so sometimes the talks are given with like with a lot of context that might not be relevant to like a lot of folks in the group, or sometimes it could be like super generic that really has very little practical application. So how to find this like balance between giving like enough but not too much of a context, as well as not to go in like too abstract?
So by abstract, you meaning like assumed knowledge, or
Yeah, like sort of assumed knowledge, or like just kind of a general knowledge that I would expect majority to have. So it's like still have something that people can get and like apply in their like in practice, but like not too detailed that might not be relevant for the majority because it's like really specific to your environment.
Yeah, because sometimes you can get stung with that where you go like too beginner and it's already knowledge that people know. I use questions a lot to handle that because I've been stung before with assuming people have knowledge that they don't have, and then all the questions at the end, I start to realize that actually a lot of the content went over people's heads. So what I tend to do is I've started engaging with the audience more and asking them questions. So you can either do it like as polls if you're not comfortable just doing it off the cuff, and you can use questions as a way to validate that assumed level of knowledge. And if they don't have it, you can put in a brief explanation. Otherwise, you can just go off and assume that's all good, and you can kind of set the scene for the rest of the talk. I mean, there are some things that are obvious. So, for example, you know, if I went to a data science conference, I would assume that people knew what a machine learning model was. They will have a rough idea. But for example, if I went to a developer conference, that might be a term that they're not that familiar with. So sometimes knowing the target audience for the conference can give you a clue. But if not, questions are a great way to try and see if you need to cover that content or not. And then if you're not sure who the audience are, double check with the organizers. Like they're always happy to help.
Perfect, thank you. And maybe like another one, I assumed like you're really more into like an improv or like preparing the speech rather than have a notes, right? Is it also like a recommendation to just kind of train yourself for like a impromptu speaking, or?
So I've changed a lot as a speaker. So when I started, I used to write full scripts. And then I, over time, would start having bullet points because normally for setups for conferences, you'll probably have a huge screen behind you, and then you'll have your laptop in front of you. So you can put your notes up, like on the little presenter view for whichever presentation tool you're using. If that's the way you're comfortable, that's absolutely fine. It's more about finding out what you need. The problem I had with notes was I ended up focusing more on the screen than the audience, in my opinion. And I would end up like reading off the content if I had a full script. And then if I missed a step because I was reading like huge chunky bits of text, it just derailed my performance completely. So that's why I do the trial runs instead. It's not necessarily to get a script in my head, it's to get the slide order in, because that's the bit where you tend to kind of skip up and trip up rather, is the transitions between slides because you forget where they are. So what I do is I have rough bullet points when I'm planning out my talk and my presenter notes. I might use them for the initial couple of runs to get ideas in my head of what I want to talk about. But after that, I don't bother with the notes anymore, unless there's something really specific, like a statistic or a number that I have to get right, in which case I'll put that as the only note, because obviously you want to get that right. So that's how I've evolved over time. But if you want notes and they're bullet points, use the notes. There's no shame in it at all. If you're the person that likes having cue cards, don't be afraid of that. Use the cue cards, use whatever you have to start to make you feel comfortable.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Just not to steal the thunder, Disco Cohen already had a question about like how to gauge the level of the audience, which you already started answering for Greg. But since he was talking about Elastic and large language models, I say, okay, this is perfect for Cardi, right?
You did a talk at Elastic HQ in Amsterdam about LLMs. Oh, you must have met wonderful colleague Ulia then.
Yes, that's true. That's true. Actually, she asked me to come do a lightning talk about LLMs and Elastic, because with my company we are heavy users of Elastic, and also on the forefront of development with LLMs, etc. So it was really nice to do a talk in December. But yeah, I'm fairly new to public speaking, so it was also a bit of a deep dive for me to get into this. And actually, I saw the post coming by on my LinkedIn yesterday, so I thought, oh, maybe this might be interesting to learn a little bit more. But yeah, my question was mostly answered actually by the question from Greg. I thought I thought it was really difficult to see the level of the audience, and during the talk to adjust to it. I prepared kind of indeed a script because I think I felt a bit uncomfortable, just to freestyle it, and so I had difficult. I thought it was a bit difficult to adjust during the talk.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really fair point, because it's something, when I first started speaking, I was very similar to you in terms of I had exactly my points I wanted to say, and it's a bit scary to sometimes deviate, because you're kind of opening yourself up if you're asking questions to, someone answering in a way that you don't expect, and then you have to improv and think on your feet. And as a new speaker, the idea of thinking on your feet rather than going through your talk maybe as quickly as possible and disappearing off the stage is kind of more preferable. So in addition to the stuff that I'd kind of already mentioned around, being able to ask questions, another thing, like taking the Elastic one as an example, you can obviously ask the organizer. The other thing that you could potentially do is look at what other talks are around your talk as well. Because one of the things that make it tricky for Elastic Meetup specifically is because it covers 3 use cases: search, observability, and security. You can quite often have mixed audiences, some of which will know a lot of the common terminology, particularly if it's specific to like a DevOps or SRE space. But then you might also have security practitioners who don't know about that stuff.
Yeah,
So
that was actually the case. I
that what
also
happened?
experienced. Yeah, there was like, I don't know, like 50 people in the audience, and like only a small group was like into search, and a bigger group into observability and security and stuff. So it was a bit difficult to adjust my level, to engage the whole audience.
Yeah, there's absolutely no shame in that, because it's a hard one to get right and balance in that. I mean, I will feed that back to Ulia, because that's still useful, because that's ways that we can help you more as a speaker. So thank you. I guess the other thing I'd suggest is if there's particular knowledge that maybe is useful, there's no reason that we can't send out details before. So if there's particular documents you recommend for introductory knowledge, you can always, we can share things afterwards, like slides, etc., so that people can read up again and digest. Or even if there's something you think is a useful prerequisite to know about and you have a good article to link to, we can share that ahead of time as well. So feel free to always chat with the meetup organizers, because they can help with things like that as well.
Yeah.
So I think I have a question of my own, and then speaking of like getting to know our audience, I just wanted to run a small quiz to know what's part of your journey in public speaking you are. But my question, Carly, I think I do a lot of online talks, right? And online talks is kind of easy because the camera is here. I have my speakers note to the side, my perfect setup, and I know where my eyes should be in general, right? When you do like a public speaking event that is sometimes recorded, like your slides may be behind you, you have your laptop or something here, you have to look at the audience, and you also want to look at the camera a little bit. So I feel very, very uncomfortable about how to position myself, where my eyes should be. So do you have any hints about how to handle this?
Yes, I do, because I found this really weird as well, because I did so I started doing online, and obviously the immediate feedback you get for doing online stuff is you need to look at the camera. Don't look at your screen, look at your camera, which feels super weird, but you obviously get used to it. When it comes to in-person ones, like if you're on a stage or you're at the front of a room or something, there's a couple of tricks I tend to have. So firstly, for slides, so that you don't end up having to look behind you all the time, if you've got presenter notes, the presenter notes will also have the slide. It'll have an image of the slide and what's coming next. So you can use that rather than having to look behind you all the time to actually see what slide you're talking about and what's coming up next. The other thing you can do if you do feel you need to look behind is, particularly if you're talking about stuff like architecture diagrams or code snippets. If you have, I have a clicker. Where is it? Yes, I have a clicker. Because I'm one of these people that likes to walk around. Never used to be, but am now. And obviously they have the little kind of laser pointers on the top. So I would always turn behind and use the laser pointer to point out sections. And obviously that's a way that you can look behind that doesn't look like you're using the slides as a crutch. So that's another technique you can do. In terms of who to look at, who to focus attention of, you could do that trick. People always told me to focus on one person in the audience and basically talk to them. And I did that for a bit, but it feels a bit uncomfortable that you're talking to the same person and staring at them, and it feels a wee bit awkward. So what I tend to do is I maybe pick 2 or 3, and I will actually, at certain points, I'll talk to them, but I will change who it is every so often so that it doesn't feel as uncomfortable, like I'm staring them down. And that way I found kind of works. The other option is you can stare it right at the back of the room, like where the kind of edge of the seats are, if it's an auditorium style, but in some rooms that looks a bit strange because it looks like you're looking up instead of looking at the audience. So I tend to find picking 2 or 3 people and kind of focusing on them is the way I tend to focus attention, but not in a creepy way. Does that make sense?
No, that makes a lot of sense, and it's better than the other advice that I gave you. Like, oh, there's NVIDIA software that will fix your eyes. Like, no, that is not a problem. You know, it's the
Sometimes it doesn't work though.
you try it. Okay.
Well, a friend of mine, Keith, uses that stuff all the time, and you know, if it kind of doesn't go right, it looks really creepy. It looks like you basically superimposed like a DALL-E image with the eyes the wrong way. So yeah, I try it. If it works for you, great. Like, there's no such thing as if the tool works for you, don't knock it. But yeah, I've not had to use the NVIDIA stuff. I just look at the camera.
Fair enough. So before I'll open for more questions, I just want to run a quick quiz here to basically figure out where you are, if you've done any kind of talk before, even like for your work, or if you're doing public talks, or if you're applying to conferences, basically get to know all of you, right? So here we go. Hopefully it will work. Tell me if it open up a quiz for you. All right. Okay, we have everyone here. Not a big poll, but it's still interesting. So yeah, I think I'm at this level that I work at, like I do a lot of things for work. Lasberry said we have the lighting talks on the aspiring speakers, inspiring women speakers group, and I gave a lot of them, but I'm still like raising the courage to apply to like a bigger conference. So I think that I have one last question then, Carly, before I open for everyone else. You've been through the entire journey, like from like small public speaking and online events all the way to, I don't know if you call yourself an advocate, but I consider yourself a developer advocate. Like, how is this journey? How do you glean those steps all the way to those big conferences and getting paid to do this?
So that was a funky journey. I think the one thing I'd add is you don't need to be an advocate to speak. Like, if irrespective of what role you're have at the moment, that's one of the fun things about conferences is all the different voices that kind of contribute their ideas. So my journey was interesting because I started just learning to speak for fun. It was a skill that I knew I was really bad at. and I wanted to improve and get better because I thought it would be good for the role I was doing at that point in time. I was a tech lead and a scrum master, and I was dabbling in other things like agile coaching. So actually being able to speak and present is actually quite an important skill to have in that particular domain. And I just ended up really liking it. Like Barry talked about the kind of high that comes from speaking. It kind of pretty much drove me to keep on doing it in a rather strange way. But I ended up doing, so through the aspiring speakers group, I submitted to my first conferences after doing lightning talks. And I did online ones, and they were really supportive. And I really enjoyed those. So that was a good kind of stepping stone. I then attended a workshop that was given by Steve Poole, who works at Sonatype, ahead of DevOps UK a few years ago, where they were basically showing you how the CFP worked for DevOps UK. And a mentor of mine at the time was like, this is a really good conference, you should submit, you should give it a try. And a friend of mine gave me the kick of, this talk will be good, just submit the talk and run away. That thing that was kind of talked about before of not being sure if the topic's right. From there I got accepted, which was really fab. And I went off and started doing more conferences in my spare time, writing content, and I really enjoyed it. But it was getting difficult to juggle with a full-time job after a while with the level I was going to. So a friend had suggested I apply for advocacy roles. So I did. So I started applying for a couple of companies. I got really far in one process, but that wasn't meant to be. And then I spotted the Elastic one, and my friend went, who works as an advocate at another company, went, you can do this. It doesn't matter that you've not got Elasticsearch experience. Just hit submit and run away. You've got, because I've been doing all the talks and all the content, the articles and things and podcasts, that had allowed me to show what I could do. I'd effectively built a portfolio of speaking engagements through just doing it for fun. And then, yeah, I got the interviews and I sailed through and I got the job. But it was all partially not just my CV and showing off the skills I had as a software engineer or a scrum master or a team lead. It was also through me showing what I could do in terms of speaking and content and having that external facing stuff. That was ultimately what helped me get my foot in the door for advocacy, because it's very common to have kind of former software engineers who end up moving into that particular route. So yeah, that's how I got here and still going. What, 2 years later, which is cool.
Thanks. That was an awesome answer, Carly. So I think Jamurai had her question first, and it is a very good question. So how do we get involved with Lightning Talks?
Anthony, you can answer this one.
Okay, that's amazing. So just going back to the beginning of the event, we have like the aspiring speakers and aspiring women speakers groups, and both of them runs Lightning Talks. And we are basically working together. And the interesting things is you come here in this workshop. We pipeline you towards our community. You join our chats or Slack channels, and there will be events like Lightning Talks announced, and we're going to ask you, do you want to give like a 5 minutes Lightning Talk? You come in, you do the Lightning Talks, this is recorded, it goes to YouTube, right? And we have partners like Devox that Carly has been talking about. And every once in a while, a few of our members will give like talks into proper huge conferences as their huge talks. So the short version is join our communities. I'm pasting the link again for everyone that wants to do this. Any other questions, Jamurai, or was this the one?
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm definitely going to have a look at that. I have another question as well, if I can sneak it in. How do you manage? Because obviously, with the stuff that I do at work, there's a lot of overlap in regards to what I want to speak about in the public space, so about cyber threat landscape. How do you navigate that, especially let's say if it's a paid speaking engagement? you're going to go there as a representative of a potential organization.
Mhm.
How have you found, like, can you accept those payments? Because technically you're going as a representative of your organization. How do you leverage it so that it's your own personal brand rather than it being specifically for your organization?
I've seen a couple of ways you can do this. So I have an interesting kind of experience with this, because before I worked at Elastic, I worked at an investment bank. So in terms of the worries about kind of talking about, and I basically didn't talk about the internal specific details of things like the projects that I was working on and the architectures and the individual nuances of the applications, because I knew that was going to get me into a bit of trouble when it comes to reviewing. So I guess that the standard rules apply of, you know, even if you're representing your company, you can talk about things that are nothing to do with the company, and that's how I kind of started out. Or you can talk about your experiences of building things, or you can talk about examples built using tools that you're already using in your company, but have not got the sensitive data within it. So that was the kind of way that I managed to navigate around it. The second thing I'd say is that if you work in a company like a large corporate, I would double check to make sure if they have any form of review process for speaking engagements. I did when I worked at Morgan Stanley, so I had to share my deck ahead of time, and I had to get a couple levels of approval from particular individuals before they would say okay to the engagement. And I think they sometimes check stuff like the code of conduct for conferences and things. I sometimes would get questions about that. But generally I would double check and make sure there's not a process that you have to go through for that. And then in terms of the kind of paid engagements thing, quite often a lot of the conferences that I go to, I don't end up having a fee, because it's normally, you know, it's something I do as an advocate. And a lot of tech conferences, they'll cover things like your travel and they'll cover your speaker ticket, but they might not necessarily give you a paid fee, but some do. For paid fees, what I'd recommend is, if you're worried about it kind of interfering with your work as working at the particular company you're working at, I would check and see if they have any rules around outside business interests. And you might need to declare it, but if you declare it as like a side engagement, it's generally fine. And then you just need to make sure that you fill in the appropriate tax stuff. Alternatively, I've seen people mark themselves as independent and not put a company name. That's another way to do it if you want to keep things totally separate.
Yeah, I think, thanks so much for that, because I'm in this predicament where my organization holds weight. So if I was to speak and I put my organization, it adds more character to who I am. People might validate like what I speak about, but then I'm trying to pivot to my brand name, but they might be like, who the hell is this person and where do they come from? So I'm trying to go down my organization, my company route, but I'm just cautious that the credibility of that, people might not. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I can kind of understand that. I mean, in terms of building a brand, so historically, when I still worked at Morgan Stanley, I would put on my profile that I worked at Morgan Stanley, because when you are speaking at a conference, they normally put up your picture and your name and the company that you're from. And I did I toyed with the idea as well, but in the end, it was a similar situation. Although this is an industry recognized company, so it's good for me to show where I work. If you want to chat more about it offline, because I know you probably don't want to broadcast to the world all sorts of details, sync up with me after, and I can maybe chat and give you some more targeted advice if that helps.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Can I maybe chime in just 1 second without trying to hug the mic here? Says, yeah, I have the same investment banking background as Carly as well. And like approvals went to a team in the United States, and it would take months to get media approval. So you have to basically know the position that you are in, right? When you have a supportive manager, sometimes it's easier to do this. When you don't, there are banks that make an exception that as long as you don't quote the bank, you say that it's completely unrelated, but they will let you have your talk as well. So it depends, you know, like I took the completely opposite strategy as Carly. I choose not to say that I was working anywhere, and I had my own company, which I was disclosing to the bank. So it's basically your relationships and like how easy it is to go through the process where you're working.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
So Rachel, you have a question?
Yeah, I guess similar vein again to where we've been talking. So yeah, I also do developer advocacy at work, and I've been speaking at conferences and meetups to help with that. Currently, that's been more on, I would say, more the personal brand side, and like my company have been really supportive for giving me that time to talk more about, you know, changing careers or yeah, learning how to code. But I think where I really struggle is obviously they want me to talk about the product at some point, right? So to give that more technical talk. But the sort of conferences that I've been seeing, like I think DevOps UK, you know, they say very clearly this isn't the conference to give like product pitches or to talk specifically like that about your company. So it can be quite hard for me to find the right conference or to know how to talk about the product that my company make without it then, you know, clashing with that particular conference's values. And I just really struggle with balancing that more like personal brand side of things with maybe my own pet projects and then what work kind of want as well. Um, yeah, that's maybe a slightly difficult one to answer, but yeah, maybe you've had similar experiences with Elastic,
I've got
Carly.
that. Yes, I've got that experience because it's about the pitch line, is what I call it. Because developer conferences are about talking about cool tech and learning. It's not a space for selling. And the problem is that if you give a talk that's super, super pushy on your product, particularly paid features, it's effectively selling, and that makes it a bit uncomfortable, and it's kind of seen as an unofficial endorsement. So there's a few reasons why they tend to try and avoid kind of that kind of thing. I have a couple of ways, I wouldn't say around it, but ways to complement that kind of ethos. The first thing is if I'm talking about Elastic stuff, I try to avoid as much as possible at conferences talking about paid features. I don't know what the situations with paid versus free features in your product, but that's something we could potentially talk about, because showing how to use free or open source features is something that is acceptable, especially if you're showing how to solve a particular problem or use case that's prominent in the community. So I'd recommend thinking about that kind of angle. So for example, if I'm building a talk just now where I make use of a bit of Elasticsearch under the covers, using the Elasticsearch kind of open free basic features alongside other tools that are open source tends to work out fine. The other thing I do is quite often, in addition to that, I'll talk about stuff, but I'll use my prior experience as an engineer. So I'll think about particular problems I've had to solve before and how I would solve them using the free features of this thing. And I'll basically build the prototype to solve that problem. So a good example is I've done stuff before on monitoring for open telemetry, but I've combined it with a real user monitoring agent, and a real user monitoring agent that's open doesn't exist in the world yet, really. Because everyone's got their own vendor specific locked-in ones, and OpenTelemetry are working on a client implementation, but it's not there yet. So I'll combine it with OpenTelemetry, which is an open standard, and I'll caveat that you need to use the right provider based on where you're ingesting the data into. Another example is I did synthetic monitoring stuff a while ago for Elastic, and because it's written with Playwright under the covers, I talked about that, but I also talked about the fact that you can use its monitoring as code, which is a particular industry construct. So it became more about educating them on what monitoring as code is, rather than being about pitching the product. So that's the kind of things that I do, is basically to make it not pitchy, is focus on a problem and focus on free features. But if there's a particular example you want to chat through, just let me know. I know it's a bit of a kind of scary line to get your head around, but we can try and figure something out.
Yeah, it's definitely put me off applying for talks because I'm like, I just don't want to be in a situation where you're getting tomatoes thrown at me on stage for being like too salesy or too pitchy and then probably miss out on some opportunities. So yeah, those tips really help.
Focus on the problem and the prototype you're building, and that'll generally keep you in a better stead. Don't mention prices, don't mention licenses, anything like that.
Gotcha. And just a super quick question, the lightning talks. So back when I was coming along to lightning talks and practicing, they had a very Java theme. Has that changed now? Is it still Java specific or is it more general tech now?
Well, this one, I think it's kind of before me as well. So no, we've had talks of all forms, shapes, and sizes, So I remembered our last ones were like Christmas themed, and like I spoke about the Grinch, and Carly did something similar as well. So there is the community has changed a little bit. It doesn't mean that there isn't still some strong technical talks, but it's up to you as long as it can make it fit like the whatever size of the day was agreed. Like all sorts of talks are welcome.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen people do talks on not just tech, but psychology, Kafka. I was doing JavaScript and LLMs before Christmas. Any topics are welcome at all. Honestly, it's more about you finding a topic you're comfortable and then using that as a mechanism to practice speaking. It doesn't have to be Java, at all. So yeah, you're more than welcome anytime.
Awesome. Cool. Sounds great. Thanks.
All right.
Folks, I just wanted to say we're almost at time. Like I would like to really thank Carly. That was an amazing session. Everyone here as well. The questions keep coming and were amazing. It is really, really good to bring this format of Speakers Clinic back. And I really, really hope that you folks get engaged with the community. Let's schedule some lighting talks soon, and hopefully, maybe in a couple of months, we'll have another clinic like this, Carly, if you're up for it. So,
Yeah, I'm game. So we can do, I think we're going to plan to do a lightning talks online next month. I think we're trying to figure out a couple of in-person lightning talk sessions in London as well. So if anyone's interested in those, let me know. And yeah, we'll be back with another speaker clinic as well. So just keep eyes peeled. If you've maybe not seen anything or you get any other questions, just DM myself or Anthony in Slack. We're always around.
awesome. So again, Carly, thank you very much for everything, and speak to you soon, hopefully on our next lighting talk there.
Yeah,
Cheers.
thanks so
Bye bye,
much.
everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.